I am in my basement. I am actually sitting on the floor in front of the largest part of my kit stash. And I'm trying to decide on what will be my next aircraft subject. And I feel like building, this is probably as a result of doing the Harrier a month or two ago, I feel like doing a lumpy British plane. And I don't mean that insulting. It's just the post-Second World War British planes just tended to have a kind of a lumpiness to them. So here are my primary candidates. We've got an English Electric Lightning, and of course I made darn sure that I got the one that had the tanks above the wings. I've got a Gloucester Javelin, and I've got a Hawker Siddeley Buccaneer. Of course, you've already seen the thumbnail and the title, so you know that I'm going for the Javelin. The mighty Javelin, which doesn't want to leave the shelf. There we go. So, according to Wikipedia, a javelin is a light spear designed primarily to be thrown, historically as a ranged weapon, but today predominantly for sport. We have a picture of a javelin and a guy throwing a javelin. And then we have the RAF Javelin. I see a resemblance there. Yeah, I can see that. It's definitely Javelin-like. So this kit was last released by Airfix in 2020. So this is currently available. This is the previous release, which goes back to 2013. And it was new tooling according to Scalemates at that time. So hopefully there's not going to be any scary build issues with this. I know Airfix fans can get justifiably annoyed when people pick on Airfix, but let's face it, Airfix has made some amazing kits, and some of their kits have just been, out and out dogs. Like, really? You haven't done anything to improve this or fix it? But then that's something you can say about AMT, MPC, Revell. Almost every kit manufacturer has some dogs in their history. So here's hoping that this one is not going to be one of those. There's some nice pictures on the sides of the box here showing an unpainted model, probably the pre-production. The other side of the box, it's just got some blurbs, and I would assume that these are the 3 color options. And let's open the box, see what we got inside here. Get that out of the way. So, obviously I cut open the bags at some point. So we've got our clear sprue, which I did leave in the bag. The instructions, which are quite intimidating in size. Oh my god. Wow. But fairly conventional. You've got a blurb in 3 different languages, and then they've got little warnings down here. Please don't eat the parts. And you can see this is a sheet giving you the stencil data. There. This is just for the stencils, not the actual large markings. Maybe I don't want to build this. Here is the decal sheet, and it is quite impressive. While I have the camera way out, we may as well take a look at the sprues. A part that was rattling around loose. We may as well get a good close look at that. Nicely recessed panel lines. Everything looks pretty crisp. But here you can see the gate where it was attached to the sprue. But if you don't know how to remove those, you're kind of SOL for building models if you can't address those. Let's put that back in the box for safekeeping. Well, we have the wheels, and then we've got the air inlets. We got some more wheels here, and they do have a flat on the bottom of them, which is kind of nice. Looks like we got some pilot and navigator headrests. Got parts for the seats. These look like the interiors of the flaps. You know I'm going to be making molds of these, eh? Goes without saying. Next sprue has got, looks like drop tanks. Very, very finely molded parts. Looks like landing gear parts. Parts of the seats. And the boarding ladder for a Javelin is quite a piece of engineering. It's nice to see that they include that. We've got parts of the instrument panels. That looks all pretty amazing. Looks like we got a lot of pylons on here. These might be ducting for the engines. I would say this looks like a refueling probe, but possibly not. This looks like a landing gear bay, fairly intricate, and then these would be the wing spars. You see where the engines fit inside there. We've got some wings. These better be the wings and not the tailplanes. Looks like the upper wings. This is a big plane. You can see the size of the wings compared to my hands. There's our cockpit. It doesn't look like I'm going to be doing any scratch building there. This looks like the front of the fuselage. This, of course, is the nose cone. Hopefully we don't have any fit issues because it looks like the fuselage is made up of segments. Here is the main portion of the fuselage, and you can see the engines live here. It's one of the reasons why I kind of made that little comment about comparing the name of the Javelin, because this is anything other than sleek. I don't know where these parts are for, but once again, the detail here is pretty amazing. So that's it. That's the parts. How many sprues do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 sprues if you include the clear sprues. That's pretty awesome, really. Well, guess I need to start working on it. It looks like, surprise, surprise, we're going to be starting with the cockpit, which comprises 11 steps? Probably more. It looks like we're going to be 15 steps before I need to start worrying about the fronts of the jet engines. And then a further all the way back to step 23 before we've got the back ends of the engines. So it looks like I can probably make a couple of molds of these parts, and then I will have them for future use. I've already got the front of the Pegasus engine from the Harrier in my vault of molds that I've done, plus numerous helicopter engine fronts and things. You never know when you're going to need something like that for some future scratch building project or adding detail. So I've just glued these parts onto this, basically it's an icing, ready-made icing container lid. They're just held on there with white glue, and it really doesn't have anything to do with this project, other than whenever I see parts that I feel could be useful for scratch building or anything in the future, I make a copy of them early in the kit building process. Any sort of a brush-on latex type material will work for this. And you just keep on, you brush it on, let it dry. It usually takes 4 or 5 hours. The first coat is important because you want to make sure you don't have any air bubbles sitting next to your part. So this will dry clear, and then I'll add another coat, and it usually takes probably 8 to 12, 13 coats to have it thick enough that you can use it for casting resin. But if you think ahead, you can usually create a mold off of any cool parts that come in kits that you build. So looking like a blob of yellow snot, we've got the mold I made of the front and the back of the engine. And once again, this is just for raw materials for any future project that might need a turbine face. There you can see the parts are still embedded. As a matter of fact, the white glue looks like it never set up all the way. Probably rushed things a bit when I did it. So, pop that out. Pop this one out. There we go. We've got a mold of a turbine with a large bullet on the front and one with kind of a cruciform on the back side of it. So I'm a couple days into assembly, and the ejection seats are just sitting on their little square bases that they fit on, and I just have this up against the sidewall here. So far the fit is just been phenomenal, really, really good. And to be honest, I'm just about to start painting all this here, and the detail is incredible. Like, I don't think you'd get any better from resin, to be honest. If we flip it over, you can see the the nose gear bay, and that thing is just crusty with detail. That's my expression of the video, crusty with detail. So Airfix would have you paint almost everything in here flat black. I'm actually going to be using semi-gloss black, and then I'm going to be dry brushing as many of the switches and buttons and with silver and other colors and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm really impressed with this cockpit. I can't imagine a resin cockpit being any better than this. Certainly not worth the investment. This is really quite nice. We'll see how it looks after I slap paint all over it. One thing I will mention is Airfix is up to their normal tricks of not telling you what color anything is. They just give you a number. Yeah, I know they want us to buy their paints. But somewhere in the instructions, if they could just give a list telling you what all those numbers mean, would be nice. Now, way back here, they do have some of their numbers called out, but not all of them, which would be convenient. And here are our ejection seats, all painted up. The straps are made from masking tape, and I don't know if you've ever looked at pictures of ejection seats, generally in a museum setting online, but half the time they look like a pile of dirty laundry just kind of tossed on something. So sometimes it's difficult to tell what goes where. I mean, we know obviously there's going to be a strap each coming from shoulder level and some from the sides, but I think this basically conveys the effect we want. I'm getting close to putting this into the cockpit halves, because there's actually an inner set of walls that holds this together, and then it goes inside the front fuselage separately. Of course, the backs of the instrument panels are not painted. There's a big console that goes on top here. But, and the underside here is just basically silver, and then I gave it some Tamiya blackish brown panel wash. But lots of detail without you having to add anything. Unfortunately, we're probably never going to see most of it. The light is a little better here over on the small hobby bench. You can see all this glorious detail that we're probably only going to be able to hint at later. But other than the seat harnesses and the straps. This is just the way it comes from the Airfix factory, which is pretty cool. Now what you're looking at here is the inner walls of the fuselage and the cockpit glued together around our seats and everything like that. You know, when I first started building models, an airplane, I would just slap some black paint in inside the cockpit and call it done. And sometimes when I put a lot of work into a cockpit and then I see how hard it is to see anything inside, you know, I wonder who was smarter, the 10 or 11-year-old kid who just smeared the black paint in there, or the person who goes to all this work and it's so hard to see. Work is continuing with the front fuselage halves, and these two little stubby parts, that's the front fuselage halves. That's all there is to them. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even completely cover our fuselage insert. Now, if you've watched my video on the MI4 made by, oh, I'll put it on the screen because I can't remember right now. Anyway, you may remember that I was very impressed with how well engineered that kit was, that there was lugs that easily fit together and everything was very precise. And this is actually quite similar, and I have to say kudos to Airfix. You can see that the front landing gear bay fits really nicely in there. The rectangle here fits on this lug very snugly. And that's a good thing, because there's a lot of stuff that has to precisely come together. You'll see very shortly. So I'm just about ready to encapsulate our cockpit with the front fuselage. So we've got the starboard side on. This should give you some idea of how nicely this fits together. A nice click. Look how tight that is. Just a slight bit of pressure to hold it in. Make the seam line up. It's nice when parts of a kit come together so well. I know I'm probably jinxing myself. It's going to be terrible later on, but... And there's our forward fuselage assembly, stubby though it may be, all ready to go. And these are the air inlets, or the very long pipes that serve as the air inlets to go from the actual openings to the engines buried deep within the fuselage. And they're not terrible. There are some ejector pin marks, which is hardly surprising. I don't know how visible these are going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lightly sand to eliminate as much of them as possible. I'm thinking that probably they're not going to stand out too much at all, but there's nothing worse than putting the whole thing together and looking in there and going, oh my god, that looks terrible. So I think it's worth a few minutes to sand the inside of these pipes. This will probably be the last time we get a decent view of the front of the engines. By the time they get put into the air intakes, you can kind of sort of see there's a turbine at the bottom, but, you know, it's not exactly clear. Here's our air inlet ducts. As you can see, they're about 3 inches long, and if I really shine a light deep in there, I can see the fronts of the engines, but otherwise, you know, you don't have to really go to town on these. One thing I will mention is one side is marked with an S. The other is marked with a P. My assumption is this is starboard and port. Starboard being right, port being left. I don't know why you wouldn't simply use left or right, but you know, starboard part, that works. More fairly precise engineering. You can see the big ear that's on the side of our air inlet. That fits in the slot here. Like that. There isn't a whole lot you can go wrong with your fitment, at least not if they've engineered it right. Our next substantial part is this basically stub of a wing root, or a wing spar. And that was going to slide on like that. And you can see there's little tabs here that line up. And I'm assuming this will make sure that all of our angles and everything are correct. because you have the air inlets way out here, and then by the time you get to the back of the plane, they're right next to each other. Once again, you can see P for port, S for starboard. Make sure you don't mix everything up. This kind of looks like something science fiction-y all on its own. Now we're bringing some fairly large pieces together. This, of course, is the belly of the beast. And yeah, it's pretty broad, that's for sure. This is where this front wing spar goes. And then this engages right here. And then this notch is where the front fuselage goes. So if we just test fit things together here, there we go. You can see, yeah, everything is still lining up pretty good. Here you can see the air inlets going together. Now, there are lips that are going to go on the fronts of these. You can see why they've got all the various locking tabs and things to hold everything all precisely together. And so far, yeah, it seems to be lining up, and all this engineering seems to be both worth it and effective. So this is going to require quite a few glue points. So a couple of clothespins here for good measure to make sure our air inlets are well bedded in and coming together fairly well. This gap here is a smidge large, although, to be honest, a little bit of white glue later on will help to minimize that. And in case you needed to see things looking a little sleek, here we go. That's how it'll be with the nose cone on. Not that we're anywhere near gluing this on, but as with the intake pipes, the jet exhaust pipes have got some ejector pin marks in them. So just using a piece of rolled up sandpaper, that's what I've been using just to sand them. And you could, I suppose, put some filler in there and sand it. I really don't think it's worth it. After all, we're looking at down a really long, tube without a whole lot of light. I don't think we're going to see that much. I mostly just want to get rid of any high spots or anything like that. More parts we're never going to see again. These are the engine exhausts. I've painted the turbine blades steel this time as opposed to chrome silver. And all of this other area here is jet exhaust. And the interior of our exhausts here, once again, you're probably never going to see them. Up near the engine, we have jet exhaust, and then as it gets closer to the end of the jet pipe, it transitions to steel. Don't know if we're ever going to see it, but at least it's in there. I deviated from the instructions slightly in that they would have you glue the second wing spar and the engines and everything all together first, and then attach it to the lower fuselage. I noticed there was just the slightest bit of a tendency for there to be a gap right here when you glued it in. So I figured I would glue it in first and then use the old 10-finger clamping while watching a YouTube video so that it would fully seat. So hopefully the rest of it will just slot in. I don't see why it shouldn't. So before I glue them in, here is our tailpipe assemblies. You can see there's some really nice detail on the actual exhaust nozzle, and I've seen pictures of the real engines, and they do really look like this. This isn't sort of a modern convergent divergent exhaust, but there is all those little holes all the way around it. And in case you were wondering, the P for port identification is all over this piece as well, just to make sure we don't get confused. Alright, time to bring the upper fuselage half to our bottom assembly here. Now before you do this, there's two holes that need to be opened up if you're planning on using the refueling probe. Now it does mention that in the instructions, but I'm willing to bet most people, or no, let's say half the people will miss that. I know I oftentimes miss that. There's a lot of glue points inside here that you're going to want to make sure you get well wetted with glue. I like to use a slower setting one for these areas and then come back in for my seam work with a faster setting one. I think one interesting thing to point out is if this is the front of the turbines and this is the end of the turbines, the engines themselves are only about this long. Now I know that the business part of any jet is actually fairly small, but really, when you look at the total length that the air has to travel in this jet, you can see the parasitic losses probably were pretty large. So how did we do with this huge assembly? We have a very small ledge here. This is pretty good. Just the slightest bit of sanding to take care of there. The back, that's almost perfect. You have a little bit of glue squeeze out here, but that's partly my fault. The only two bad spots, and they're right on top, is here, and we've got quite the ledge there. But when you consider how complex this assembly was, that's pretty good. So I'm going to try using a sanding stick to take this edge down a little bit. At least the high part doesn't have the detail. It's the area that's lower down. A few minutes with the sanding stick, and it's not perfect, but it's probably one of the better joints I've ever had on an aircraft. I mean, certainly compared to some of the huge amounts of filler that I've had to use on some other kits, it's pretty darn good. So I think I'm going to end this video now. It feels like I filmed maybe about 20 minutes worth. Maybe not. I don't know. You can look at the counter and see. Here's a little teaser of the pointy bit on. So when you look at it in profile this way, it actually looks fairly sleek. So when you turn it this way, it starts looking a little fat. And the nose on view. But I'm really enjoying this build just because everything is going together so well. Well, now I jinxed it. Yeah. So, seeing as I have two other large Airfix 148 scale kits in my stash, I'm hoping that they go together as well as this one does. Hope you're enjoying the build. Thanks for watching. Until next time, just keep on modeling.